The search is on. Danny Smyth officially retires as Winnipeg's police chief this week, and a new top cop will hopefully be in place by the end of October. But as the search for his replacement continues, what should Winnipeggers expect of the person who will take over? Information Radio's Marcy sat down with former chief of police Devon Clunis with his thoughts on what the next chief needs to do.
And when you look at the last, I would say 5 years, what's been going on in culture, you see there's been an incredible divide that's grown between police and the community. And I think the next police chief really has to be incredibly focused on building those relationships, having face-to-face conversations, reconnecting police and community, and really, I would say, educate the public in terms of what effective policing looks like moving forward.
We're in a moment where to bring everyone back together is going to be a task.
It is.
What does that look like? Does that look like the chief saying we're going to restructure and have more police directly engaged with community, or does that have to do with the person themselves?
Yeah, and again, I want to be very careful not to politicize this in any way, shape, or form, because I'm not here to comment on Danny Smyth's term. When I look at what he had to deal with compared to what I had to deal with, the environment was radically different. I'm not certain I actually would have wanted to be the chief of police during that time. It was just so difficult. So, however, at the same time, it is about us getting back to having these conversations, being really embedded in the community. When you look at post-George Floyd, the pandemic, there was not that real community cohesion. Like, we've lost that. So I would say we need to really be focused on rebuilding that community cohesion. And yes, I would put that task first and foremost in the chief's lap to say this is your responsibility. That is a position that we have, significant ownership of it. But we really need to rebuild the health within the organization and the health within the community. It has to be a parallel task, can't be just one or the other. And what came out of George Floyd and the pandemic, and sometimes I don't think people actually recognize this, was a significant amount of trauma for those who were consistently on the front lines. Anyone in emergency services, policing a significant component of that. So we have to be focused on rebuilding the health within police organizations, but also rebuilding the health within the community. And that means sitting down and having face-to-face conversation and actually putting ourselves in each other's place and try to understand that ultimately, we're all having this very difficult human experience and oftentimes trying to deal with it individually in very isolated conditions.
How difficult is it as a leader? You've been the chief of Winnipeg Police, as you said, at a very different time. But how difficult is it for a leader to try to represent what we're hearing over police officers who instead of going to 10 calls are going to 100. Police officers that are just really trying to get through every day. They're stressed, they may be burned out, there's lack of resources. Maybe they're also being vilified on social media. And maybe there's good reason for that, sometimes maybe not. But that's the stress of the police officers, potentially some of them. And then the community, as we outlined, not trusting, maybe even fearing interaction. And then you have the chief, who presumably needs to connect, but also represent both sides. How do we return to open conversation? What kind of a person will it take us to get there? Or is this through what kind of systemic changes do we need to make it happen?
I'm not sure it's just necessarily systemic change. It goes back to what I said earlier. I think we've forgotten that the people wearing the uniform, underneath that uniform, under the badge, is a heart just like yours and mine that beats, has the same type of emotional reactions to difficult things that we see in community. But at the same time, from the policing perspective, we sometimes become very isolated and we forget that the individual that we're dealing with, it's not just the next call. There's somebody who's having probably their worst day. And for us, it might just seem like it's just status quo. It's what we deal with all the time. But we got to remember, treat people as individuals and truly care. The environment in the last 4 years, societally speaking, has been very difficult for those who are trying to serve and those who are being served. So we need to get back to the point of just having conversations. The next leader has to be very empathetic, both to the members and to those that we're serving, and recognize that it's not just so much about law enforcement. More law enforcement will not fix what we're dealing with. More empathy, more connection, more recognizing the humanity on both sides of this equation. That's what we need to get back to. I can tell you, when I was a chief of police, people would often tell me this when I'd be out in the community. They would say, Chief, we feel the difference. How do you measure a feeling? And it was because we were really trying to connect. Over the last 4 years, as I said, not blaming anyone for this, it was just the conditions that we were dealing with. People have become very separated, very isolated. We need to get back to that point of being connected and have people feel the difference.